What do we know about the Aztecs? This people is often confused with other Mesoamerican Indians, the Olmecs, Mayans, Incas, Toltecs. And understandably so. All these nosy people had names you could break your tongue over, carved each other's hearts with obsidian knives on an industrial scale, and used rubber almost 3,000 years before Goodyear. The mysterious culture of South American Indians is often used in science fiction. Take, for example, the crystal skull from the fourth Indiana Jones. Today we will delve into the rainforests of the Yucatan Peninsula, walk through the mountains of Mexico, and look at the world through the eyes of an Azteca. Azteca, in Nahuatl, literally means someone from Aztlán, the mythical place to the north from which the semi-wild tribes of our video heroes came to Toltec lands. The people who today are called Aztecs called themselves meshika, hence the word Mexica, tenochka, or tlaltelolka. The Aztec Empire increased the population of Mesoamerica 1.5 times. It assimilated the ancient cultures of its neighbors, and died quickly at the hands of the Spaniards, nearly carrying the millennia-old heritage of its ancestors to its grave. Only crumbs of knowledge about them have reached us, which we now try to collect. The Aztec Empire could be considered small in modern terms. The state was located in the Valley of Mexico City, about 50 by 50 kilometers, surrounded by mountains. It is an arid place now, but in Aztec times the nature here was very different. A chain of interconnected lakes ran through the valley, creating ideal transportation routes for boats. The Aztecs came here from Aztlán in the 13th to 14th century, known as the Place of the Herons. It was some place in northern Mexico or perhaps even higher up on the map. The 200-year-old migration was led by the god Huitzilopochtli. On reaching one of the lake islands of the Mexico City Valley, the Aztecs received a sign from the gods: an eagle sitting on a cactus and eating a snake. Here it was decided to found the city of Tenochtitlan, the place of the prickly cacti. Researchers believe that the sign was politically motivated. There was little room in the densely populated lake basin. The islands could be enlarged artificially, and boats made it easy to reach any part of the valley by channel. By the standards of the Toltecs who inhabited these places, the Aztecs were nomadic savages. The Aztecs worked as mercenary warriors for local kingdoms, expanded their possessions with artificial Chinampa islands, arranged lucrative dynastic marriages, and learned. The Aztecs' craving for Toltec knowledge was incredible. Suffice it to say that the Aztec word Toltecajatl meant culture. Society was divided into two large classes, the Masuali, peasants, and the Paili, nobility. Social status depended on military prowess. Having taken a prisoner in war, one could become a warrior in a standing army. A few captives and rich booty brought him into the category of Paili. 4 or 5 captives made you an eagle or jaguar, 17 captives made you a tlaloni, tribal ruler. The way to move up the hierarchical ladder was open to almost everyone. An adult went to war and stopped cutting his hair until he had captured his first captive. Small groups were allowed to join together to hunt humans. If after 3 battles he did not have any such trophy, the guy got the status of a Masuali. Such people could continue to fight, but usually devoted themselves to arts and crafts. Merchants, postkas, occupied an intermediate position between the peasants and the nobility. They helped the former by buying up their produce. The army also received help from merchants, for they visited lands outside the empire and served as an invaluable source of intelligence. In 1430 the Aztecs formed an alliance with 2 neighboring tribes, defeated several opponents, and united a vast territory under their rule. The supreme official bore the title Huitzilopochtli, Great Orator. The Aztec Empire was focused on constant wars of conquest. The subjugated territories retained relative administrative independence, but were subject to tribute. Paradoxically, the Aztec conquest of large cities stimulated their growth. They were part of the trading system of the empire and benefited greatly from the exchange of goods. The Aztecs were excellent traders and managed to make deals even with enemies, the Perpetua Indians, for example, who produced copper axes. Large empires without well-developed transport arteries very quickly crumble into separate principalities, and the Aztecs understood this very well. The main part of the tribute imposed on the conquered territories was the obligation to build roads. The Indians did not use draft animals or carts, preferring to travel on foot. The roads were guarded so that even women and children could travel alone. Toilets were built every 10 to 15 kilometers to keep pedestrians from going to the bathroom on the road. Information, traffic, was provided by the Painani messengers who shuttled between the cities daily. The Aztec diet was based on the 3 whales, corn, maize, beans, and pumpkin. Some researchers argue that such a diet was fraught with protein deficiency, pushing the Aztecs to cannibalism. In fact, the floating islands yielded up to 7 harvests a year. The menu included porridge, stewed vegetables, sauces, tomatoes, peppers, seeds, seaweed, and sugar, and the Aztecs got animal protein from insects, fish, and game. Meat dogs and turkeys were also bred, but they were sent under the knife only on special occasions. Cacao beans, which served as the equivalent of money, were boiled to make fragrant frothy chocolate, and agave juice was used to make pulque, a fermented cactus juice of up to 8 degrees strength. Strictly speaking, the diet of the Aztecs in the 15th century would have been the envy of many modern people. With the Aztecs, anyone could sell himself into slavery and then buy himself out of it. About a year of freedom was given to spend the money from the sale of oneself. Slavery was also granted to criminals and debt defaulters. A slave was set free if he could prove that he had been mistreated. There was also a custom: if a slave ran outside the market walls and stepped on human feces, he was set free. Only the master could apprehend him. An outsider who tried to catch a running slave became a slave himself. The children of slaves were free. If a slave was lazy, prone to escape, and resold several times, he was shackled, making it difficult to run through the crowd, or sent to sacrifice. And now let's walk through Tenochtitlan, the capital of the empire, sprawled on a lake in the middle of Lake Texcoco. Dozens of bridges span the lake to the city. In the distance are levees that protect the metropolis from frequent floods. People in loincloths and cloaks look a little like the ancient Greeks. They hurry to Tlatelolco, the satellite city of Tenochtitlan, where a huge market for 25,000 people is organized. Here you can buy everything from exotic birds and maize to ornate cotton clothing and slaves. The market has a rich infrastructure. There are barbers, porters, and even judges to whom you can go to protect the rights of consumers. You don't have to worry about the quality of the goods as they are carefully inspected before they hit the counter. Tenochtitlan is like Venice. Around the city there are floating gardens made of baskets of silt woven around wooden piles and willows, to reinforce the structure with roots. Between the islands is a network of canals used for irrigation, transportation of goods and fishing. In the central part of the lake, water is salty, nothing grows there. Farming is possible only on its outskirts, where the underground springs come out. Drinking water is provided by 4 kilometers of clay aqueducts coming from springs on Chapultepec Hill. Almost 20% of the population is engaged in agriculture. The crops grown, as well as the tribute coming from the invaded territories, allow to feed about 200,000 people. According to other reports, the population of the capital reached 500,000. The city is divided into 4 quarters: Tiapan, Moyatlan, Quiapapan, and Aztecalco. By the beginning of the 15th century, Tenochtitlan was the largest city on the planet. Only Constantinople could compete with it. The population density is very high, over 15,000 people per square kilometer. At the same time, the city is remarkably clean. When the Spaniards first arrived in Tenochtitlan, they were struck by the brutality of the Indians' religious rituals. But what shocked them even more was the fact that the center of the city was completely devoid of trash. Even the grass that made its way between the stone slabs was carefully weeded out. On this basis, the strange custom of freeing slaves who had stepped in feces becomes quite understandable. There was simply nowhere to find them. It should be recalled that for European cities at the time it was considered the norm to pour the contents of night pots out of the windows into the streets. The Aztecs washed at least twice a day. The fruit of the copalchicotl, soap tree, was used as soap, clothing brushes were made from the centenarian root, and steam baths used brooms of aromatic herbs. Most Aztecs live on the outskirts of the city in one-story structures made of twigs and clay. There is a constant dampness, and the ground is loose underfoot. The Indians have to huddle together. Entire clans live in the houses, with people trying to settle by occupation in the Kalpuli quarters. Bird feather makers, potters, stone carvers, and merchants formed semi-autonomous communities within the city. They build their own schools, have their own patron gods, and field warriors for invading campaigns. The Aztecs established a system of general education. Until the age of 15, children were taught at home, mostly heroic epics and wise sayings. Later, the child of noble parents could go to a Kalmakak school, where he learned rituals, astronomy, literacy, history, public administration, and laws. Those who were poorer went to the tepecali of their neighborhood and studied religion, trade, and crafts. It is noteworthy that girls were not taught literacy. At 15 they were often married off, so a crash course in housekeeping was preferable to reading and spelling. The use of cosmetics was frowned upon. Whitened skin and black or red teeth were associated with prostitutes. Finally, children of all grades and genders attended kwikali, music and dance schools. However, in both higher and lower schools the main emphasis was on the art of war. The training regime was extremely hard. Cold water pouring in the morning, hard physical work and ritual bloodletting brought up the necessary brutality in future fighters. Interestingly, the prestigious Kalmakak school did not guarantee career advancement at all. Many noble offspring went to Tepecali, where the main emphasis in their studies was on warfare. After all, fighters moved up the social ladder much faster than priests. 4 times a day and 5 times at night, the roar of sea shells and the rattle of temple drums sounded over the capital. In the absence of a city clock, the priests measured time in a rather noisy way. The wealthy occupied tall stone buildings near the temples. The latter are concentrated in the center of the city and enclosed by a protective wall of Coatenpatli, snake wall. The architectural dominant feature of the capital are the 2 30-meter pyramids of Huitzilopochtli and Tlaltelolka. Montezuma's giant palace housed a zoo, a botanical garden, and an aquarium operated by 300 people. Freaks, hunchbacks, and albinos were also kept here. The Aztecs were fans of tlaltelolka, the ball game. According to one version it was made of rubber, another, of stone. In the latter case it was impossible to play without damaging the limbs. The aim of the game was to drive the ball to the opponent's side of the field. If you managed to throw it into one of the 2 rings on the field, the team won immediately. Only knees and hips were allowed to touch the ball. The game was spiced up by the fact that the losing team was sacrificed, or maybe the winning team as well. Historians have different opinions. Bets were placed on the results of games. You could bet anything, even yourself. There were cases when rulers lost entire cities. The average life expectancy of an Aztec was 37 years. At the same time, Aztecs were allowed to drink pulque only when they reached the age of 70, a kind of pension. However, young Aztecs compensated the ban on alcohol with the use of hallucinogenic mushrooms. The Aztec ritual calendar had 20 months with their own names. One born in the month of the rabbit would be a drunkard, and one born under a snake would surely become famous. Wars to capture people for sacrifices were called flower wars, because future captives often met the Aztecs with flowers in their hands. Shedding blood for the sake of the gods was considered a duty. The Aztec pyramids are inextricably linked to sacrifice. It is still shocking a man was laid on a convex stone, his chest was opened with an obsidian knife, and his heart was cut out. Women were killed while dancing by cutting off their heads. Children were drowned in honor of the rain god Tlaloc. Some were thrown alive into the fire, others were shot with bows and then skinned. The priests fed the bodies to animals or cut them up into pieces as gifts for important people, and occasionally used them as food for ritual purposes. The skulls were flaunted on zompantli poles. Shocked Spaniards recounted the sacrifices of many thousands. However, excavations give a more modest figure. Every 52 years under the knife went only a few hundred people. In fact, there was no cruelty in the sacrifices. The Aztecs believed that this was the only way to maintain the natural course of things, above all, the sunrises. The gods required sustenance. Blood maintained the structure of the universe. Therefore, most victims, except captives, went to their deaths willingly, and an almost kinship relationship was established between them and the priests. To any calamity, be it a flood or an earthquake, there was one answer: sacrifices. If that didn't work, Plan B, more sacrifices, would come into play. Sooner or later, the disasters stopped on their own, so the system generally worked without failure. The scale of the ritual murders is legendary, mainly due to Spanish conquistadors and priests who sought to vilify the pagans. The misunderstanding on both sides was absolute. The Europeans were sickened by the sight of blood-stained temples, while the Aztecs were horrified by stories of Torquemada's methods. The Aztecs did not torture people, ritual wounding with knives or spikes did not count, even the emperor bled himself regularly for the benefit of the sun. Throwing disemboweled bodies off the pyramids had a demonstration practical meaning. People could see that the sacrifice was accomplished, and the junior priests quickly carried the body aside to cut it up. On November 8, 1519, Hernán Cortés entered Tenochtitlan with his troops. Cortés raised the morale of his soldiers in a rather original way by sinking caravels, cutting off all avenues of retreat. Montezuma declared Cortés to be Quetzalcoatl, and the Spaniards to be messengers of the sun, and showered them with honors. In response, Cortés captured the emperor and captured the city. In the summer of 1520, however, the Aztecs rebelled, and Cortés was forced to flee. A year later, on June 4, 1521, he again besieged Tenochtitlan. The Indians fiercely resisted, but on August 13, the huge metropolis fell. Almost all of its population, at least 200,000 people, perished in the fighting. The slaughter of cities was not a practice in Europe. The Indians, allies of Cortés, probably did their best. About 40% of the population of the Aztec Empire died from smallpox brought by Spaniards. At the highest level of hygiene such diseases were unknown to them. The invaders destroyed Tenochtitlan and drained Lake Texcoco, ruining the ecology of the region forever. Now Mexico City stands in the place of Tenochtitlan. The city still lacks drinking water,